Welcome to Eyesite Academy. Here, we'll be sharing pearls of wisdom in ophthalmology through videos, photos, and clinical case perspectives.
This is our first video on the channel focusing on Ifis, Intraoperative Floppy Iris Syndrome. Surprisingly, the pupil is well dilated at the beginning, which is unusual in such cases, and we'll show you a step-by-step approach when this happens in the middle of the surgery. So here is the case. Look how the pupil is well dilated and stable. The accessory incision pod is made and trypan blue enters the anterior chamber. Now viscoelastic goes into the AC and the main incision is made. Here comes the capsular rhexis. 4 to 5 mm rhexis is ideal. Now the hydro dissection. And look how the pupil and the iris maintain good stability. There is no correctopia or even prolapse of the iris. An Ifis case usually at this point will vomit the iris stroma through the main incision. Here comes the first central groove. Now rotate and do the second one. Here comes the pre-chopper, a nice and easy split between each group to then aspirate each small quadrant with the phaco tip. At this point, it looks nice. You have almost completed aspirating all the fragments, but ouch, look, the iris starts to prolapse through the accessory port. When an iris starts to prolapse like this, you better start to be cautious because this means that the iris is mad at you. And now with the irrigation aspiration probe, you start to aspirate that cortex material. And here is where you see the real Ifis. Because there is any retention that sustains the vac flush of fluid, the iris starts to move up and down. Here it is tricky because the vac is very mobile, and even with good infusion, you will begin to struggle to put the AI probe posteriorly and have good access to the periphery and aspirate that cortex. Here, an excellent tip to use a second instrument will be a chopper or a spatula to help elevate that iris and reach this peripheral cortex. But you see, it is not easy. Here comes more viscoelastic. At this point, you can perform visco dissection of the posterior cortex to help you bring this up. This will avoid touching the vac and promote a spontaneous rupture. So you see, because the space between the vac and the iris stroma is not so deep, it's very shallow, you also start to give these little kisses with the AI probe to the iris, and this will close even more the pupil. Now, here is a good tip. You can flush with BSS the periphery of the vac, which will lose the cortex, but be careful not to do too much, and please do not go through the main incision because you will end up with continuous iris prolapse. Remember, here you need to play with fluidics. Less pressure in the vac will always help to control the iris prolapse. Now here, you can put the IOL in the back and rotate the lens to remove and release the cortex. Here comes the IOL in the back and rotation is made. It loses a little bit more of the cortex, but again the iris comes out. Here is another option. Put a second accessory incision for doing bimanual irrigation aspiration. So with bimanual AI, you can easily reach the periphery, but guess what? The iris still prolapse. Closing temporarily the main incision will help to maintain stability. This is another option. Look, there is still a small amount of cortex in the inferior periphery, and even though you have good stability, the iris won't let you go much further, even going behind the IOL. You can flush again with the BSS cannula. Yeah, that's the piece inferiorly, but again, too much flush will put the iris out again. So my advice at this point will be to leave a small piece of cortical material. This will not be the end of the world, and being so obsessive about removing everything in the last steps of the surgery can complicate it and prolong it in instances you don't want to deal with. Because here, again, you need to put more viscoelastic and go again inside the eye with the irrigation aspiration probe, and more trauma and more manipulation will eventually inflame the eye. So removing the viscoelastic and applying Michael at this point to close the pupil will be very helpful.
So at this point you can remove the nylon suture from the main incision and it looks well sealed. It's a good outcome. Here are some tips. First, not all Ifis cases will jump initially, so be prepared for any situation because usually you see poor mydriasis and you will probably use iris hooks or other special devices to open the iris from the beginning. But when it happens in the middle of the surgery, you need to be patient and try not to lose the situation. Don't be too obsessive, removing all small piece of cortex, because here is where many of the complications happen, and you can eventually prolong a surgery with limited outcomes or at least not the same ones. Never flush through the main port incision when you want to irrigate BSS to remove the peripheral cortex. Putting the IOL always helps to protect the back in this case scenario, even before removing the cortex. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.